Yeah, I guess we can just start. My name is Jared Williams. I'm the co-founder and current director of Lions Jaw Festival, which is an annual experimental performance and dance festival that's based in Boston, Massachusetts, Cambridge, Massachusetts. Um, this is unceded Nipmuc, Wampanoag, and Massachusetts territory, and um, that those territories also cover the location of Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, which is co-hosting this event. And like many of you, we've been deeply affected by the pandemic, and this was going to be our inaugural year with MIT, and we were very excited. And they've just been incredibly supportive through this weirdness. And we're very grateful for this collaboration and looking forward to it continuing. So yeah, Susan Wilson and Jay Scheib are two of the people we've been working with. Susan's here and we'll say a few words in a second. I just want to thank Thomas DeFrantz and Jumatau Poe and Joy Mariama Smith, who stayed up late to be with us here today. Super excited. These have been so beautiful, and I'm sure this one will be too. So again, we might have some time for questions at the end, but otherwise, I'll just hand it over to Susan.
Thanks, Jared. Just really quickly, we wanted to just say how honored and grateful we are to be able to be putting this on with all of you wonderful people. We, of course, like Jared, really much wish that we could be doing this in person, and hopefully next year we will be able to. MIT Performing is a collaboration with the MIT's Music and Theater Arts Department and the Center for Art, Science, and Technology. And we're hoping to bring more of these kinds of collaborations in this upcoming weird, bizarre, hopefully inspiring season. And with that, I will just give it straight over to the incomparable educator and artist, Tommy DeFrantz.
Thank you, Susan. I have my candle so that we can start in easy with a grounding gesture. And I broadcast today from Durham, North Carolina, where I live and labor. And the space where I broadcast from sits on ancestral lands of the Shakori, the Ino, and the Catawba people. It's been a remarkably complex emotional journey through this version of the Lions Jaw Festival this year. And I think these entanglements will continue, certainly for me, for quite some time. Today, I'm really happy to be talking to beings who I have known for a little while. And I want to bring in this acknowledgement, I have 8 great nephews. So 3 of my nephews and nieces have children, and they have 8 boys between them. And I want to bring these boys in to be with us today because I want them to have the queer possibility that we all might want for each other. And I'm thinking about them and wondering alongside them with us here today. So I'll go to our panelists and ask you what you'd like to acknowledge as we begin our conversation. And of course, how shall you prefer to be addressed by others today or this evening? Jumatau, will you?
Yes, I will. I think maybe we want to race not to go first between Joy and me. Greetings, everybody. I'm Jumatau. right now I am located in my brother's car, which I have been driving while he's been in Brazil. I am normally in Sakimauchin, also called Philadelphia. Right now, I am on Canarsie land, actually at the Canarsie Pier in Brooklyn. I had to come up to New York from Philly today for a couple of different reasons. And I'm here now, and I thought about being outside, and I just wanted to be next to the water. And so I wanted to bring you all closer to the water, but you get to see my brother's car and me. And so I'll bring my brother with me here, which I normally do my siblings. I'm the oldest of 5 siblings that share the same parents. And I also have 3 others from my father and not my mother. And I tend to bring them with me, whether I like it or not. It feels like if anybody on here knows any of my siblings, you probably know what I mean by that. And I'd like to bring in those people to whom I'm an ancestor. I want to bring them those ones that I haven't met yet, who I'm excited to meet and to never meet. In writing, I'll usually always, what is that? I tend to use my name. My pronouns fluctuate from environment to environment. I invite you to call out whatever you're called to. I'll let you know if I needed to change.
Hi, can you repeat the question?
Hey, it's a chat. It was like, how you be, where you be, what you be, how you feel you.
Okay. I am in more than one place at once. I feel like my part of my energetic body is in Philadelphia, because that's where I was born. So sort of +1 to Juma, parts of Juma's sentiments. And then part of my energetic body is somewhere else, probably in space. Like, I definitely feel like I'm not present somehow, which is, yeah, I guess putting me on a different level and feeling, already grappling with the fact that I'm in the Netherlands and it's dark. That feels strange because I'm like, I think like this is the first moment that I've been on a panel with people that I know and am deeply connected with that are where I am from in all of the ways, I guess. So that is an interesting feeling. But I know that I contain multiplicities and complexities, so that's fine. I was thinking about how I would like to be addressed. And that's always fun to answer. I think, so what popped into my head was the Honorable Joy Mariama Smith. Or like Queen.
Yes, Queen.
I also really like pet names, specifically having to do with desserts. So cupcake or sweetie. But really don't do that if you're not feeling it, because I will know. And pronoun wise, you can use the English neutral ones. I don't actually know how mixed linguistically the group is, but where I am, there's a lot of languages that don't have neutral pronouns. And in that case, you can always use my name, Joy, or if you want to practice recognizing Blackness, you can say Black Joy.
Yes, please.
So that's an elaborate answer, but all those things are allowed. And I think, just to reiterate, I like this phrase when I like talk to my ancestors of, especially when I'm asking for help or trying to figure something out, that I name the ancestors that I know, the ancestors that I don't know, and the ancestors that know me better than I know myself. So I want to holler at that triad. And I think that's it.
That's terrific to kind of help us pivot. And I was thinking about how we began each of these three sessions of this, the Queer Futures Lions Jaw, with this, trying to have this gentle acknowledgement space, but then this question about address as well. And there, it is about a certain kind of consent, like what is it to be in a relationship where people somehow agree in some way. And I hadn't really framed it that way in my sort of consciousness until I was thinking of you, Black Joy, because I know this is something you work on. And jumatau, I've witnessed jumatau in creative craft be incredibly diligent about consent. And, as BIPOC folk, but Black folk, the three of us, like, maybe we could think about that together a little bit. How does consent sort of manifest in our Black queer possibilities? Or we can remove the labels, since it's the three of us. We can be as nasty as we want to be among each other without having to be sort of compelled into 5 or 8 identities, as you say, Joy, the many identities that we have. But what about consent? Let's see if we can start there. I mean, do you go into relationship with terms of consent? Do you find them along the way? How are you working with consent these days?
Me?
Yeah, Black Joy, why not? Thank you.
Let's see. How am I with consent these days? I'm not gonna answer that question because I think it's right now impossible for me to answer. But I can talk about where am I with consent these days? Because I've been researching it actively for a while. I think my life has been a research on consent anyway. Yeah. I think like things that are popping into my head is having a politicized body, so moving away from labels, but knowing that I have a politicized body that's also a performing body, that also is a body that gets a certain gender projected onto them. All these things carry complex relationalities with consent and performance, where I I'm definitely doing some excavating around what that looks like. What's exciting to me about that right now, because a lot of people talk about consent and are sort of walking or talking the talk and not walking the walk. Again, if someone doesn't understand my like Northeast American slang, maybe just put it in the chat and I'll try to explain it. This like idea that in practice, I hear a lot of verbiage or vocabulary around consent, and then I don't see that matching behaviors, and I have that's disturbing. However, I was actually trying to say what I enjoy, and what I do enjoy is that the people that I'm in conversation with, I'm having really interesting conversations, primarily with the aid of Denise Ferrer da Silva, who I will shout out to, who is helping me go back to the etymology of this word, which actually means feeling together. And I think when I stay in that zone, it's much easier for me to be with all the complexities and not like put myself in a box or put someone else in a box, or if we are in a group, what is feeling together, sensing together look like when it's not just one relationality but multiple ones. And how I can train myself to continue to cultivate skills in feelings. And I see a question in the chat.
Oops.
But I don't know if I should answer that right now. I see it.
Let me see.
Yeah, we can, we can circle back through chat later so you don't have to try to do 5 things at once if you want. So that's cool. Yeah.
Thumbs up.
Yeah, Jared will help us with that a little bit later. Yeah.
Joy, were you about to say something? Oh, I see you're muted, so I'm assuming that you were good with that. And I like thinking about what you said about the etymology of the word of consent. It's something, I feel like consent is something that I used to say and talk about a lot in various practices as an educator, practices as an organizer, practices as an artist. And I don't use the word so much anymore. I think because I'm not totally sure what I'm saying when I say it, meaning it feels like that word is so pervasive that I don't know what somebody's hearing when I say it, and I don't know necessarily what they're saying when they say it to me and when we're talking about it, which is a space that I'm in a whole lot. I speak Portuguese as well, and it's not, I learned, I didn't grow up with Portuguese, so I feel like I am frequently in a place of confusion around words and engaging in a whole kind of matrix of communication, really, really accepting that and trying to decipher and diffuse things as well. Diffuse what can feel like this didacticism of certain words sometimes. So with consent, I feel like the notion of it and how I understand it, and especially Joy with you introducing that etymology of it, that feels important to me. It feels like there is something that is central about being together, about community formation, which feels very central to all of my different works in life and to my life. I was talking about my family earlier, and I think that seeing myself in relationship has been something that has been super central in my conception of what it is that I'm doing here, here. So I think that there is something about an ability to invest in the care, in a certain type of care, to be able to risk confusion and to be able to get lost kind of in the confusion of communication, that I feel like is central to consent. And it also feels like for me, especially these days, I mean, it's not, I feel super choosy about community. It's like, I mean, I don't make friends so often anymore. Which feels okay. And it feels like there is something about the intentionality of that kind of community formation, of the ability to invest in consent with people that I'm interested in. And it also doesn't feel like, I don't feel like I have an infinite source for that, So it feels like, I like to, and I need to be choosy about how I'm going about that. And that also doesn't, there's lots of instances where that can't happen. And I think to me, it gets also very messy, this, how to deal with that, how to deal with permissions and boundaries and feeling, and the interpretation of feeling and communication of them.
Yeah, but and inside of that, something about a kind of like shortness. We're all constrained under the Rona, in our sort of different versions of lockdown, different parts of the world, where JMS is, as well as quite different from here in some ways. But yeah, I do also experience this kind of shortness of willingness in a way that's quite different than 8 months ago, for myself, like a willingness to be called on to do certain kinds of labor that we're all called on to do, and we get that. But then also as a, someone headed towards queer maturities of many kinds, it's like there's relationships that want to be developed, and like, I want to be available, and I'm sure you do as an educator and mentor as well, to be available into family. So then, yeah, how to make different kinds of intentional decisions, especially now, so that you can understand your own energetic flow as well. Like that seems big, like you being in the car because you wanted to be near the water. There's something about a willingness to caretake and be available to yourself and others that just seems in there.
That's another, that also feels like a word that word availability.
Good.
Is also something that I think about a lot. I mean, I mentioned before, I grew up as an oldest sibling. Mm-hmm. And the expectation of my availability feels like it's been, that's been something that I'm accustomed to, that I've grown to understand as central to my identity. I mean, it feels like I've integrated it. It feels like I've integrated a capacity to be available. There's, I don't think, I was, I mean, I was thinking about maybe something that came up yesterday in the Queer Futures, something about, what is it, like the back, something about being able to see your, I don't know, somehow somebody said something about bottoming. Yes. And I thought about like receptivity, and just how thinking about being receptive and being available, and how that kind of permeability, sharing that kind of permeability with someone, really sharing that, you know, I mean, I feel super, super passionate about sex education in general, but I think that kind of, you know, it feels like there can be these cultural imperatives to be permeable and to be impenetrable. Though those kinds of dichotomies, and it feels like I spend a lot of time trying to understand availability, receptivity, being permeable, which I have a deep appreciation for it. And I think, you know, like I was saying about with, you know, investing in consent, that doesn't feel like something that's infinite. It feels like that I love to make a choice to be available, because it feels like there's a lot of gravity in that, because I know that I'm using up something in myself, you know. Hopefully that can be replenished, but, you know, I mean, it's a lot to really be receptive.
Mm-hmm.
No, yeah, that, I mean, that availability, that is like, that feels like a huge, yeah, very close.
Hi, this is the ASL interpreter. Can we take like a minute, because we're having some technical like difficulties right now?
Yes, please. We'll take a moment to set, reset.
I think now we figured it out, so there we go.
Thank you, Hercules.
Yeah, no problem.
Joy, you there?
Yes. I mean, to be honest, I was just thinking about how sometimes I do queer cardio and I play a lot of Justin Bieber. And I like the Justin Bieber has a song called Available. That's really good to do cardio too. But when I have a very sort of vivid moment of the last time I was allowed to be in a room with a group of people sweating and yelling, which was a privilege. That I was doing, you know, heavily influenced by Jane Fonda and Richard Simmons, just to sort of date myself, but not too much. That I was doing these arm movements and talking about like the arms being extensions of the sternum and availability. So I'm definitely like a witch, so I'm definitely trying to like do some spell work through the harmless guise of Justin Bieber and like you know, inceptioning some queer messaging. But I think like what I hear, and I don't even know, like I'm very bad at perceiving things through screens, like, so, but I'm just gonna pretend like the what I perceived from Juma, this vibe of like how we took a journey from consent to availability. And what I felt super aligned with, that I may be projecting, but like maybe not, Juma, you can tell me, is the weight of a Black body and with like availability. Like I actually can't even right now, especially in Corona. It's like where I'm also gonna like sidestep availability and also not link it to bottoming and receptiveness. As a person with a pussy, like I think there's many ways to be receptive and many ways to bottom and many ways to top. And sometimes it has to do with how available you are and sometimes not. But I did want to talk about boundaries. What do you have to say about it over there in the lab? Because you're laughing, Tommy, so I know there's something behind this. I see you.
Yeah, I don't have a form thought, but this idea of boundaries and consent, I'm just thinking about how we, each of the three of us in our multiplicities are called on to do so much work about helping others understand boundaries or availability. And I'm thinking of all the times I've been told I was unavailable or, just had too much attitude. And I get it. And it's like having to double do the labor of the boundary and the consent and the availability, because something that's so lovely about how jumatau was tilting us back through family, and family is one kind of relationality, and sometimes it's so fucked up and sometimes it's amazing, and then there's chosen family and birth family, we had different constructions of family, but that's really different from kind of making worlds and the spaces where kind of speculative imagination, and then all around this question of what's allowed for folks who are moving through spaces of Black queerness. There's this this constant question of what's allowed, where's the boundary, where's it gonna be unavailable, or you better stop, for all kinds of reasons. And that's why I'm laughing, because as I brought those little great nephews in the room, I remember one of my little nephews was looking at a photograph that was on the wall where I live, and he was like, "Why is that guy naked?" And I was like, "Because that guy's amazing." And I didn't really have he's like 4. But then the little boy was like, "I don't think he should be naked." And I was like, "Well, why do you say that? Why don't we, let's look at his body and let's be together in this sort of contemplation." But there was this question then about my brother, whose great, whose son it is, or my nephew whose son it is, and all of that sort of thing. So yeah, I went a lot of different directions there. Joy, did that help at all, what that laugh was?
Oh, I mean, yeah, totally. I just thought of something else around availability and boundaries and consent, and I can't, how you just phrased it with this little one who's 4, the way that you said some phrase that you were like being available to this little person you said something about being together in contemplation, I think, and somehow that was linked to availability, and also like whatever capital or bandwidth or spoons, for people that know what spoons are. I give a shout out to you. Where this negotiation of, yeah, can I be with you in contemplation on something, is definitely a huge question I am asking all the time, almost these days. And I just read my horoscope, and apparently that's what I'm supposed to be doing. So I can take stock and balance and reset like where I need to be putting energy into something so that I don't burn out because I'm trying to do survive or whatever. So I think that's actually pretty interesting. to just pause for a moment and think who we are able to be in a moment, a contemplative moment with, I think is actually a pretty, well, you're brilliant, Tommy. So, so yeah, I was sort of spacing out thinking about that.
Juma, you good? Jumatatu, you okay?
Yeah, I'm just. I was around small people all morning between the ages of 4 and 10. Joy, did you say a contemplative moment? Is that what you just said a moment ago?
Yeah, because I sort of, not like contemplative dance practice, but like, which I enjoy sometimes, but like, oh, I am in a moment, I'm being fully present and contemplating X, which is what I sort of extracted from Tommy's looking at this image of this naked body. Then I was like, oh damn, like when do I slow down enough to arrive at a moment where I can be in contemplation with someone that I then dragged into contemplative.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's, yeah, I mean, you know, I think like so many people, I've been feeling slow. So many people, I've been feeling slower. I think that I feel like there is something about slow that is like in my genetic material.
Nice.
I remember, I think it was maybe when I was in 3rd grade, one of my teachers, something that I think I needed more time on a test or something, and then one of my teachers said something like, "Oh, why do you have to be so slow with everything," or something like that, you know? And something about that, it was something about how that was agitating the rhythm of an accelerated class or something like that. I don't know, you know, which has stuck with that, and then also a kind of choreographer mentor figure said something like, what did he say about how my work, they always get surprised at the length of my work because it always seems so much longer than what they realize that it is. And it does feel like there is something about that kind of, yeah. I'm thinking about it. I mean, I'm just thinking about how the Joy, you were connecting this slow in contemplation. I mean, for me, that's what I heard. And I think that I agree with the, you know, like I think that slow kind of, I mean, you know, the pace of reflection to me feels slow. And it also feels like I was in North Carolina recently with a friend of mine who has 2 dogs. And being around I don't have any pets. I didn't grow up with pets. And being around those dogs who spent, you know, 92% of the day just kind of in a kind of vegetative state, you know, contemplate. You know, I mean, I don't know what goes on in that state, but then at the drop of a dime can just be up and like active and agile and so attentive. And I just think about how you know, like those rhythms of slow and fast, how they work together. I love to be fast. I love to move fast. I love, you know, like this kind of like lightning speed realization kind of thing, you know, like that kind of phenomenon. And it feels like that that slowness has to happen abundantly in order to allow for some of those twitchier kinds of things, and that the twitchiness relates, that creates this thing where, you know, like where that slow can develop new meanings, you know, that can't be developed in that kind of twitch energy. But it's something about being around these kids too today, about that kind of like, I don't know, something about that, like the rhythm of concentration and focus, which felt, I don't know. It's been so long since I've been one, you know. Anyway, something about the way that those things go together, that the way that slow and fast go together is really interesting to me. The way that slowness, or, you know, I mean, there's so much kind of cycling about rest now, politics of rest, and, you know, how that is related to, could support, you know, like these rhythms of work, you know. And I think a lot about how in different communities, how our cycles of work and rest can better support one another. Resting so that somebody can work, working so that somebody can rest. And I don't necessarily, like, when I'm saying work, I'm not talking in a 9 to 5 day, right. But, you know, I mean, I do think that there is work involved in being this planet. You know, there is labor that I think that there is labor that is a part of a human responsibility. And it also feels like it is supported best in that, you know, by abundant slowness.
Nice. Abundant slowness is just delicious. And Joy, I wonder, I was thinking about you made an offhand comment about your sort of practices of alchemy or witching. And yesterday we were talking about weathering, but something about slowness and witchery or witchiness, or not witchiness, but witching, making things be able to transform through time, being reconfigured. That's how I'm trying to connect those ideas. And I just wonder how your practices of kind of other ways of being, if you will, you know, I don't know how you characterize horoscope or crafting or spelling, making spells, but something about how they operate in time with you, or how you're thinking of time. Be really curious to hear that.
Oh, yes. Well, I recently got a kitten. And I remember her name's Ash. She's Black. So named after Arthur Ashe, because Arthur Ashe is the first Black person I did a report on in school for Black History Month. Also, I'm like giving you clues to my age, but I'm not really gonna tell you. And I remember one of my friends, like I was like talking about how Ash's personality as a kitten, being a couple months old, being like, she's social, and she very quickly, and this also sort of dovetails into how Juma was talking about dogs. But Ash also has the ability to be like totally 100% knocked out, relaxed, and then can like pop up and be like alert, which I also think for me is related to feeling together and consent and boundaries and availability, like, and work, rest. Like I think that I'm just so blessed to be in this constellation of thought with y'all, those visible and those not visible. But so Ash, I was talking about like someone, and I was like, I don't really like that person. And my friend was like, well, Ash is gonna know because she's a witch's cat. Like, she'll know and she'll probably behave in some kind of way. And then I was just kind of like, no, but she totally does. Like, she's still like a kitten. And I think about, so this is sort of like other ways of being. I'm using Ash as we are in a relationship that is developing. We are developing a language. We are figuring out how we be. And I think a lot of times she is my mirror, which is wonderful to see and also helps with my own access to slowness. Because true stories, I tend to sort of overdo and do many things at once. So I think when I think about work, or like when I do work in dreams, or when I'm using other things, whether they're objects, or, you know, I'm a little bit of a rock nerd, or if I'm trying to be intentional in speech or intentional in writing, or like, what is a spell? Mm-hmm. I think I have so many different practices that are that are sort of interwoven, and it really depends on what context I'm in. If I name that's what I'm doing, because I think part of, it's like, okay, how many diasporas am I a part of, and being of Indigenous descent and African diasporic descent, and some other stuff. I mean, I'm not doing any sort of 23andMe or whatever the thing is now, but I also know, and I'm not actually prioritizing the known over the unknown, because I value both and in between, and that's also important. A part of my magic is sort of conversing and entering states of unknown and being okay with that, but that there's also like part of my heritage is coming from a place of alchemy and healing and communicating with things other than human beings. And because that heritage is also diasporic, I definitely have like a collage or pastiche of things that I pick up along the way, or things that land in my lap, that I feel out. I mean, like intuition or emotional intelligence, like these things. I think it's interesting. I think maybe Juma said earlier, when they were talking about speaking Portuguese and language and etymology, that one of the main things that I'm discovering now, especially now that I'm sort of embedded in some institutions, is I no longer want to have this hierarchy of language, and certainly not the English language. Like, sometimes I don't want to prioritize articulation, verbal articulation. And sometimes language can dilute or pollute some intentions. And sometimes I don't need to be afraid of not being able to articulate myself, or I also don't need to be afraid of moments of silence, where I might just be, there might not be any words. There, like, formless thought might be a thing. And as an educator, I wonder what kind of environments I need to support so that that is also valued. Because for me now, I'm sort of learning and doing at the same time, which is okay. But I'm like, ooh, in my imaginings of the queer futures, it's like, yeah, if we could just not like bog ourselves down with you know, if we can just like get into the earth and get into the body and feel the fluids. And yeah, like those fluids are actually good for our brain. Like also, and so then we can, this is also why when I'm going into theory, I do aerobics first so things can move around. I mean, I've been away from Juma for quite some time, so I don't know if you have what you're thinking about over there. But I guess somehow this is also related to this slowness. And I'm noticing also how we are governing this space of like what compels us to speak. Like there's sometimes we're pausing and sometimes we're thinking. Are there different ways of understanding that we're pausing and thinking, or do we need to say things? It's not a judgment. It's actually just a question to throw out into the mix with all the other questions. I also want to say something about Hercules, because for a minute there I couldn't see Hercules, and now I can see Hercules again, and that is, I don't know, I feel really supported by being able to, I mean, in another lifetime I actually studied ASL, so it actually feels really supportive to be in an environment where there is an interpreter, and to also see my voice in another way. And I just want to express gratitude for that. I see you.
Jumatau.
Yeah, let's see. For some reason, I want to tell, it's not a story, but for some reason I want to say this, and then I'll see later if it connects. I mean, I guess it does. You know, I'm here, so. I remember, oh gosh, there was, you know, so it was some kind of like some epiphany that I had, like probably my last year in high school or my first year in college or something like that, where it was like, oh my gosh, there's all these different past iterations of me that are running around and, like, you know, being reiterated through different stories that other people are telling, you know, about something that they remember of me. And I'm just like, oh shit, I'm different now, and you don't understand, and maybe we're not friends anymore. Maybe, you know, maybe I moved away. I used to move a lot when I was younger, and, you know, like I felt like I was leaving all these different versions of me behind, and it made me feel like for some time it felt like I had to deal with that kind of dissociation from myself that it felt like it caused. Like all of this spillage out or something. It was really, but it felt like I didn't have control, and I didn't know that I'd consented to that, you know. And it's and I feel like it has a lot to do with the way that I think about. I think it, you know, what got me here, Joy, was, you know, when you were kind of extrapolating the magic that you do. No, sorry. I don't think you explicitly said the word magic. That's what I heard. But when you were talking about witchery, when you were talking about witching, but for me, I think about magic a lot, and something about how I guess how slippery myself is to hold on to, or, you know, I have this kind of like slow partner dance practice, and thinking about how for me, a notion of a self as a kind of independent, I was thinking about that, like independent, how much that's, littered kind of all over the historical, political documentation of this place. Not even the place, it's not the place, it's the nation, that, like that kind of abstraction of the United States. And I feel like I've been so incredibly attracted to interdependence, and something about like being a part of these diasporas I'm connecting to, Joy, that you're talking about, understanding that there was never any way for me to, and this has a lot to do with actually how I think about consent, when I do, that there was never any way for me to be completely individuated from everything else, for a thing of me to be completely individuated. And I think about how interdependent all of those things are, and how in a given moment, if I, what are the possibilities if I, am cell jumping, energy jumping, fusing with this 4-year-old that I'm talking to, and then we're becoming for that moment whatever, a thing, and that is, that has the same kind of validity and potential of form that this kind of notion of myself could and does. And the same thing with, like I tend to spend a lot of time with trees. They do. I mean, they are cousins. And thinking about just what it is that happens when I'm with them, when I'm away from them, what that physical proximity does, what that kind of concentration space is when I tap into trees, and when I'm in a place that doesn't have them, or where they're deep, far beneath the ground, what I can see. Yeah, I mean, I think that there's something about that. There's something about that that ungraspability of self that also interacts a lot with my notion of when we were talking about receptive, or I guess I brought that word in, receptiveness. It doesn't feel it doesn't feel like a one-way journey, and it also doesn't feel like an individual task. It feels like something that is very communal to be generated. If it's going to be really generated, and if it's not, then it feels like something else, like I think that there's also, I think that there's plenty of availability and receptivity bottoming that is something other than an agreement, that is definitely something far from an agreement. And then that I don't even, for me, I don't even like to think about attaching those words, because it feels, I mean, it's, the words are, anyway, yeah, I don't know, something about that, Joy. I'm just
I feel you. I thought of something, which was an essay that's on the internet of Fred Moten, that's Consent to Not to Be a Single Being. And I thought of that because you were talking about a few things, but and then I just started thinking about holes, and black holes, and like space, and this, and maybe that's a bit of Inception, because there's these things, I mean, that we've touched on sort of already, always, all the time, the darkness and fear, and what's darkness and blackness. And also joy. And I was wondering if what you were talking about, because you sort of went into this story, I guess I was curious, Juma, about like pleasure And when you're talking about the trees, because I definitely felt like, oh yeah, that's when I'm like doing my plant medicine, and I'm like definitely like talking to some plants, and I'm like really feeling, feeling being, it's not, I don't need to have a word because I'm with a plant. And with trees or like other than human situations, it seemed like there was a moment of pleasure in there. And I wonder, like, as you were telling the story, and I wonder if is pleasure in that trees moments, or like somewhere in there.
I mean, God, it's the, yeah, I'm feeling it, and I reiterate. I mean, I just get like, I'm so non-committal with words, like I'll say something and like there's just this immediate thing that happens. I'm like, oh, that's not really what I mean. I don't dwell on it as much anymore, but just because it just feels like, oh, I don't want to waste everybody's time with that. But but I'm thinking about this, pleasure. the I will, yes, I will receive that. I will accept that word. I think there is something sublime. I think that there is something physical, I think that there, that feels, and I've also like, I'm having personally, like, and I guess professionally, because so much of my work has to do with sex and sexuality and sensuality. I'm feeling like I'm going through something in that, all of those realms. I've been like, I guess like celibate for maybe a year and something, which I guess is, it's while being celibate, I feel like I've had sex twice and then realized, during that, like, oh yeah, I'm still celibate. But it's just, it, I think that there is something, that complex matrix network of myself is trying to work out with themselves, that that I feel like I can't really invite other folks into, other kind of networks of selves into right now. And I do, and I have like, I feel like, so it in terms of I think it has something to do with, it has something to do with pleasure. It has something to do with trying to work around my way around again to prioritizing my own pleasure. I feel like pleasure is a priority in my life, and I feel like guidance toward pleasure for me, for other selves, that feels like something so central. And there is something that I'm working on with my own pleasure where it feels like a little bit obscured right now. And I'm trying to figure that out. So it doesn't feel like being with other beings and like, with like these cousin trees. It doesn't feel like it doesn't feel like the answer is there. And I don't know where it is yet, I feel like it wafts to me like scents sometimes, but I can't, I can't hold on to it, because how do you hold on to the air? And I'm an air sign too. And so it's like, I'm just like, oh God, this makes so much sense, Jesus. There's beauty. I feel like there's beauty also, like it's just like having access to something beauty, which just feels like so huge inside of being with the tree. Oh my gosh. And there's these like, I'm going to be out of town, out of the country in a little bit. And one of the places I'll be is with these places with like these trees with these long exposed roots. That just feels like, oh my gosh, you're just like to just to be so kind of like, you know, I don't know, is it naked or is it, you know, just exposed? And it just feels like such a, I don't know, I feel like there is something I need to be there to understand. Is this vulnerability that I'm seeing, you know, these exposed roots? Is it I don't know. Anyway, yes, yeah. Something about that. I think that I know I said pleasure, so I think that I talked about something that you were asking about, Joy, but a little bit all over the place. But yeah, what I'm curious now too. Like, where do you, Tommy? Please let you know. I don't want to hijack anything, but I'm curious to know from you, especially since you're bringing it into this space. What is your kind of what's your how do you navigate through the maps? You know, like how do you navigate through your maps to locate your pleasure? What's that kind of navigation process like for you?
Yes, please.
Mm.
Joy.
Yes. I'm trying to write down your formulated list of mapping pleasure. I'm trying to get the direct download.
Is it on the internet somewhere?
I'm like, isn't everything these days? It's like,
That came up the other day. Are we on the internet now? Is that where we actually are, or one of the places we are?
Is the internet like mycelium?
what is mycelium?
Like spores and shit.
Hmm. I do love technology.
Is it because of displacement? Is that one of the reasons?
I think it has something to do with confusion. You know, it feels like I feel like, especially in thinking about the internet, you know, like that kind of cesspool of information, it feels like I feel like it confuses and I don't have any kind of, you know, I don't use that as like a bad word, but you know, it confuses truth. No, it confuses a singularity of truth. I
feel like I'm kind of following in a way, and also really thinking about Zakiya Jackson's Becoming Human, and in like the next to last chapter, she's talking about how Black life is always bound up in being disoriented, and we're pretty good at being disoriented since it's a kind of basic tenet of being a Black person on the planet. So then that confusion of space, it's familiar. So we have, maybe strategies. And I don't think that Jackson offers it like a good or bad. Like I wouldn't make it that tiny. But there's something about being compelled epigenetically, like before birth, to be like the animals we were talking about, predisposed to handle disorientation in certain kinds of ways that maybe is part of what makes it seem as though we can do all the work. Because we've actually been, in some ways birthed into a social system that expects us to be able to do the work, the labor of pleasure, the labor of spirit, the labor of political activism, the literal labor of building the railroad, or cleaning down the classrooms under COVID so that the other folks can, sit and take their theory course. So something in there about like, an ability to negotiate and navigate, but also as an expectation that I'm wondering at. Because I'm sure, I imagine that, each of us have been tasked with being able to handle shit that, we didn't want to handle it either, but there it is. It's like, somebody's got to do it. So then who is going to actually do it? Well, the people who actually are already born into being able to navigate confusion and cesspools.
Hi, William. Thanks. I thought of like 30 things while you were talking. And let's see which of those things come out of my mouth. Somehow, yeah, I'm still like hooked into Juma's tree thing, but then I had a really vivid memory of learning how to walk through the forest in total darkness. And also like, okay, so also being educated in a time where there was no internet, and then there was, so having a split experience of educational spaces, and how information, but when the screen sort of came, and it still happens, I just made a joke the other day where I said that Macs were racist because the setting on the camera of a Mac like can't perceive my fucking blackness. It's so annoying. Like it's never right. And then if I'm trying to be slick and use a sexy Zoom background, I'm like a ghost, which is definitely something that I'm gonna like work with as material, because it's just, there's just too much there to not. But making jokes all the time about like being on screen, and also looking back and also carrying with my ancestors this like jokes upon jokes about being Black in the dark and being seen or not being seen, which is definitely a trope, but what spaces I use that in. And I just started, I mean, Tommy, you were there at 10th Congress with, oh shit, I can't remember this person's name, but did like a Black dark workshop.
That was Nigel Whitson.
Yeah. So
Nigel.
that was awesome. And I thought about like how many times in my life I was in scenarios where Blackness and darkness were sort of conflated in a way that felt violent. And then when I sort of took the reins there and used Blackness and darkness and intentionally conflated them to as a skill, as part of my magic, as part of my power, as also like understanding how darkness can be used, when darkness is protection and freeing, and who said what to whom that made darkness scary or bad. So the memory that I got when Juma was talking about these exposed roots is taking pleasure. I mean, like growing up in Philly was not like I was deeply going into the forest. Like now that I live in Europe, there's a lot of stories of romanticized and maybe horrific stories of going into the woods and XYZ happens. I didn't have that as a child. I was like going to the parking lot. So at the same time, I didn't, when through the few trees that I was around as a child, which are definitely now condos, I would go walking through these trees, and I would take such pleasure in being enveloped in the darkness of the woods. And then later, as an adult, or actually quite recently, learning, like using this moon cycles when the moon is waning from full to new, to understand how to walk through the forest, and just walk through the forest at the full moon and do that all the way to the new moon. It's like amazing. And I'm sort of like, what is this, like feeling like I can still see, but knowing like what is seeing or perception, and feeling sort of like the things that exist. I think there's also working with like understanding the shadow self and how to use that. Those are all things like when I'm sort of enveloped in darkness in nature outside, and when that feels comfortable, is definitely like makes me question of like who taught me when to be uncomfortable with darkness and why. So now I'm sort of in a zone where I'm looking at darkness and blackness and pleasure as like sites of extreme power and extreme comfort. And again, sort of Juma, like you were saying about celibacy, well, how I'm making a connection is like trying to remember, you said celibacy, and then you sort of link that to an understanding or a focus of not being busy with sights or moments of pleasure with other, but like really having a focus on self and your own understanding with yourself, and maybe not even multiple selves, with a self. I think this is also sort of what I'm doing, but in the dark. Now that sounds like, I don't give a fuck how that sounds, because I like, actually, I give zero fucks of how that sounds, because I probably mean it in all the ways it can be meant. So I just wanted to say somehow that's also related. And I want to name that just because I'm operating in the dark or doing smooth moves in the dark doesn't mean I am trying to blur any boundaries or trying to obscure boundaries or trying, when I talk about envelopment, it's because I think then you get into the tricky consent la-la-las, which we don't need to talk about. And it's also related to some of the research I'm doing in dark room spaces. Yeah, it's just like, what is that? I don't need to name what it is, but there's a feeling that I get where I'm not busy with trying to understand how I can navigate. Like maybe it's in my DNA that I have skills walking the earth in the dark. That would make sense. Maybe it's magic. Also fine. maybe I'm like part cheetah, like who cares? And I think it's funny, like when I hang out with Ash, who is totally Black, and it's dark in my room because I don't have any lights because I'm particular. But when it's dark and we're in my room together, like how we see each other is really interesting, and how I can tell where she is because of the absence of light is really interesting to like move towards. Like, I'm not afraid to move towards a void, or I'm not afraid to move towards an unknown, especially if it's Ash, because I'm like, oh, I know that. So let's play together. And she's a cat, so she can definitely see me. That was like all kinds of everywhere, but I feel like that's also fine.
So good. Exactly. We're moving towards like, you know, Zoom limiting. So boundaries of Zoom, there are some, I think. But I really did want to like propose queer futures and queer reproduction. There's a way, and this was really not planned, but it kind of just emerged. There was a kind of way that in the first day of this trio of days, we were chatting about present and like, how are you, you know, how you be and present. And then there was a way that yesterday we were spending a lot of time thinking about time and 20,000 years ago and how we're still then, we are then. And so I wanted to kind of propose to the two of you, or the many of yous, this question about reproduction, like how does queer reproduce? Like, how do you know, we hinted that we see through birth family in a certain kind of way, but what are other queer kinship sort of futurings that you're thinking about or busy with or wondering at?
In relationship to that, about this, you know, these wonderings about future and queer futures and reproduction, I'm thinking also, Joy, about at some point you were talking about how you learn to walk in the darkness in the woods, or maybe in the woods in the darkness. I don't remember what the order was. I taught for 10 years at Swarthmore College. And during one of my colleagues' retirement kind of ceremonies, there was this older person who came out to Swarthmore from Philly, who, I don't remember why we started talking, but somehow we just started talking. And then this person asked if, I think was asking about where the offices are. And I was like, oh yeah, well, my office it's a shared office. It's down in the basement. And they were like, oh yeah, let's go see it. And so we went down there to go see my office. And there was I feel very sensitive to like the overhead fluorescent lights. I don't really like them so much. So I'll always, you know, I'll kind of throw open the office door, and while it's closing, go make my way around all the kind of shared stuff into the office to the lamp at the back of the room to turn it on before the door closes so that I can see, because there's no windows in there. So I was kind of going through that choreography while this person came into my office. And there were a couple of, maybe like 3 or 4 seconds while we were in the darkness, while I was fumbling to find the light. And then I turned it on, and this person was there just kind of like staring at me. And they were like, you need to spend more time in the darkness. And that is really, you know, that's really stuck with me. There were also these drums in the office. They were like, oh yeah, you need to spend time in the darkness with these drums and just feeling. And it feels like it has a lot of I think that I'm getting to the end of a choreographic project that I've been working on with a colleague of mine named Dante Beecham for the past decade. And a lot of the most recent part of that work has had to do with moving into backspace, moving behind ourselves, walking behind ourselves, crawling behind ourselves, moving into the unknown, and how to do that, moving into the darkness, and how to balance like a mission, an objective, with all of this unknown that already exists. Just because I don't maybe know it, it's there. And there's a certain, and then for me, I kind of lean on, there's a certain kind of faith that I need. There's a certain kind of acceptance of this kind of interdependency that I need. There's a certain kind of care that I need to do, so that I need to have, so that I can care for myself and care for what's there in the unknown. And there are some things that I have assumptions, like like if I'm doing a kind of controlled moving backward exercise in a studio, and I know that Dante and Maria are with me, and if I can't see them with my eyes in this kind of front and peripheral space, I can assume that they're in my unknown, like in this backspace, in this darkness, in this behind. But that they're there, and I'm caring for them in the ways that I know them, the way that I assume them, the way that I don't know them. And it feels like there's reproduction. I've been thinking a lot about reproduction lately. Yeah, I don't think I'll talk about that publicly other than saying that. But I do feel like there is something about this belief and care for the unknown, this faith in the unknown, and also a trusting in it, a trusting that, that care can move both ways. Something about that feels, I don't know necessarily, does it feel like, I think that something about the lack of easy or immediate definition that has, the definition in terms of like a kind of clear languaging, in terms of like a, being able to assess a clear kind of form, immediate form, like something about that kind of lack of definition makes it feel like that process, there is something that is queer about that process of approaching future. And it also feels like it's, it is needy, if I could think about that word as detached from like, these kinds of negative associations with it, pejorative associations with it. But there's something about it that is needy, there is, if I'm thinking about doing this on my own by myself, then it feels like that's already, if not the wrong path, it feels like maybe it's already a reason to be still, to still that, to still that for a moment before, to still what? I don't know, to still what? I mean, like, it's like, I mean, I feel like time is, it's always happening. So I don't, what is the stilling? Anyway, this quietness is also like that quiet, and maybe that's still, maybe they're related, but but that quiet also feels important. And I feel so aware of that in this pandemic moment, when there's, so frequently I'll just need to have like one of the Netflix series play all throughout the day, just so that there's some noise, because sometimes the quiet, that space that is so abundant, feels overwhelming, and I can't deal with all of that possibility. I need to have something that is maybe a little bit prescribed for me, in some certain moments, so that I don't have to deal with the freedom of losing myself,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are the Zoom police gonna kick us out?
They are not. I just I have Zoom practices that yeah, but we're good.
Okay, because I respect and value everyone's time, so if there is like people need to leave, I feel like that's fine. I also am not terribly aware of time because I'm so in a different time zone that I'm like, what? But I did want to talk about this reproduction thing.
They do, yeah.
Plus one that I have also been thinking about reproduction. Not gonna name that also like Juma. However, what is interesting to me, so what also pops into my head is I don't know what y'all are doing over here, but in overly relaxed Netherlands, there's like clearly the second wave is happening.
Oh, okay.
And before that, although not visually, but like if you look at the math, before that happened, I was like, okay, like I'm relatively aware. I just sent an email. I do like queer public service announcements via email where I just like pick a bunch of people and I send them some stuff. Sometimes it's what I'm thinking, sometimes it's porn, whatever. And in this case, I was like, hey y'all, I'm thinking about what I don't want to do. Just if you want to follow the thread in my mind or one of the many, I'm linking to Juma's like, oh, by myself all the time, I'm gonna do la la la. Like that's clearly I don't want to like be, I don't want to say wrong or not the right path, but by myself is not something that is serving me at the moment. So in thinking about when I was anticipating another wave, because I know what a pandemic is, which means you got to take the long view anyway, and you have to take a long view into the unknown. So I really just want to like, like double snap to like Black folks, minoritarians, oppressed people that already have this skill set of trying to like a vast unknown or like not having access to la la la. We might not already know how to do some of that. People that have experienced war or things. So I was like, yeah, like I talked to an elder and I was like, yeah, I don't want to like get into this capitalistic white supremacist, like, oh, I need to improve myself, like, and be more productive now during the pandemic. Like I need to come out better than I need to emerge bionic. Fuck all that. I was like, what are we doing? Who do we need to be around? What are our strategies? What are our resources? What do you need? What do I need? Like, where's my escape hatch if I need to fuck off to an island somewhere? What does that look like? Who can I cuddle with? Like, really just being, I think also like queer, POC, poly, like all these like sexual strategies, all these things that in certain institutions are like, we don't talk about those things. But those skills that we already have actually help us navigate the time we're in now. So when I think about reproduction, it's like the being with and the sort of sitting in an unknown and connecting, like putting a lot of energy into how I'm connecting and the intentionality around those connections, and also shift my understanding of reproduction similarly as I shifted my understanding of production. Just like if you're like following along that there was already a mention of like work rest relationship. It's like, okay, like, yeah, what's kinship? What's reproduction? What am I trying to reproduce? What are the bonds that I need or long for? And how am I, if all that's moving around, how do I sustain that? And maybe it has something to do with darkness. Full stop.
No such a thing as full stop, huh? But there is joy, black joy right here, and gracious, a gracefulness towards your generosity, and a thank you. We pause and shift to acknowledge the work that William and Hercules are up to. It matters that they get a break if they need it, and also that people can adjust to their relationship to the screen and all of that sort of thing. It's a remarkable conversation. I thank you so much. I want to invite everybody who's still on the call to unmute and say adieu and thank you, and more please soon, as you will, to the panelists. And also just obviously sort of commend Lion's Jaw to keep making platforms for experimental thinking, experimental being, reconsiderings of reorientations and queer futurity, so we can kind of be in the space of figuring ourselves out among each other with some sort of grace and some sort of love. So an unmute and a thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for 3 amazing days.
Nick. There you are.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.